For the agent that must be in the know, Medicare Industry Insider discusses critical insight, noteworthy trends, and upcoming issues in the Medicare market.
Deciphering and debating the legislation, regulation, and what's happening in the market. I'm Jalen Jackson.
And I'm Rachel Bremeyer, and we're going to talk shop, dive deep into these complex topics, and make them understandable and actionable.
If you've ever wondered where the world of Medicare is going and how to prepare for the future, Medicare Industry Insider is the resource you've been looking for.
Hi, I'm Rachel Bremeyer, Executive Sales Director at Senior Marketing Specialist, and you are watching Medicare Industry Insider.
I'm Jalen Jackson, Compliance Officer for McNerney Management Group, and we've got about 20 years of combined experience in the Medicare industry, and we really love kind of demystifying some of the things going on in the Medicare market. Today, we want to deep dive a little bit on how to market Medicare, and I think this is a question that we get asked constantly.
All the time.
And the answer always changes.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, we have seen a lot of changes in the industry in terms of compliance guidelines, in terms of how to do things correctly. And so many times we have agents ask us, how do you continue to get a steady stream of new clients with the industry? I mean, even little things like how people collect data and answer ads and things like that have changed. So we're just going to dive really deep into how to market Medicare today.
Absolutely. And I think the two words that you'll probably hear us repeat every time we talk about any of these topics is value and trust. That's really what we're going to talk about. How do you build that value? How do you stay relevant to your clients? Where do you, can you borrow trust, or do you have to build it for yourself? And I think there's ways to do all of those things. But of course, this is pretty timely. We did see CMS release the final rule for 2024. With all of the policy and technical changes for Medicare Advantage and Part D. And it did change a number of things related to marketing. And I don't want to rehash what the exact rule was or did, but I do want to talk about one kind of key component that went into this rule and really talk about this idea of communications versus marketing and kind of maybe where one bucket is pouring into the other with this new rule.
Absolutely. And I think communication and marketing is where you probably get this all the time of, is this compliant? And sliding an ad over. That's probably one of the most asked for things that you get asked about as a compliance officer. But communication is one of those things that doesn't exactly ask for a sale. It's something that advertises you still, but it's not going to say, call me. It's not going to say any carrier product. And some examples that we've seen have been really good are getting a recipe card and putting your contact information on it. That's a great one. People put those on
bookmarks to leave at the local library, important phone numbers in your community, things like that.
Even medication trackers that they can stick in their wallets. It has your contact information on it. So anything that's not specifically asking for the sale would be communication. Marketing, though, is where it gets a little hairy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as we know, CMS defines marketing as things that are drawing attention to a particular plan or plans, mentioning specific benefits, or asking for that sale or that enrollment. And I think what we're seeing with this final rule and kind of what we've been leading up to the past couple of years is CMS is trying to take a lot of things that were in that communications bucket and kind of pour them into the marketing bucket just so they can get a little more oversight. Right. So some of the requirements to more specifically list benefits, if you're going to mention anything like dental, vision, hearing, any of those commonly held benefits, you're going to have to put a dollar amount in front of it. You're going to have to reference which carrier is offering those benefits, and that pours a lot of those things from that communications to that marketing bucket, which means going through that CMS approval process, which is getting a lot longer.
Yeah, what's the average length now? Around 90-ish days?
It really depends. It really depends. So, CMS will tell you that most things will be approved within 20 days in the Health Plan Management System, HPMS. But the problem is the actual process of creating and approving a piece is much longer than just the time it sits in HPMS. especially with this new rule, having to send everything to any carrier you plan to represent, getting their approval, dealing with their editing process. Those 5 carriers you want to represent in the market are probably not going to agree. So one may want certain changes, then you'll have to send it back out to the other 4, and so on and so forth. There's going to be a lot of back and forth before you can even get something into the health plan management system.
And in addition to that, it's a yearly thing as well. They have to be submitted yearly. So July is normally when you want to send things in, and every July you'd be sending more in. So
absolutely,
that's why we want to distinguish communication versus marketing, because one of them has to get approval, one of them does not.
Correct. And I think the biggest thing is talking about, I know compliance is kind of the boogeyman for a lot of people, and a real kind of downer sometimes. A lot of people are saying, oh, what's the industry coming to? How are we going to keep doing this? How are we supposed to do our jobs?
We have some people getting out of the industry because of that.
Absolutely.
It is a boogeyman. And some people saying, oh, well, I'll take this opportunity to acquire and grow that way. So we're seeing a lot of shifts in the industry because of compliance and because of a lot of the marketing. How do you continue to get a steady stream of clients? I think that's what most agents are just really worried about right now.
Yeah. And I think that's the big thing we want to talk about today with you all, is some of the things that you can do. I don't want this to be focused on here's the rules, here's things you need to avoid. I want to talk about where, again, that value and trust. What are the things you're doing on a day-to-day basis to build value and trust with your clients, with stakeholders, with referral partners? And a lot of it starts with building that network.
100%.
There's an old, I forget who the author was, but one of those old 80s, early 90s, big rah-rah sales guys. He wrote a book, dig your well before you're thirsty. And I think that absolutely exemplifies networking. There's a lot of times that, we'll get a call from an agent in, say September, talking about, hey, I really want to stop by this pharmacy and try to get a booth in there. And, I'm not saying it'll never work, but build those relationships back in July. I'm a big, big outdoors person. Yeah, I'm a big outdoors person. I do a lot of fishing, a lot of hunting, and I've absolutely gone and tried to build relationships who maybe they've got a farm pond that I want to fish in. And I don't show up on the doorstep with my waders and my fishing rod and knock on the door. No, show up and have a conversation. So, I wouldn't show up at a pharmacy or a doctor's office with a pull-up banner and a table. I would show up well before AEP and just build that relationship, have discussions about what's going to benefit both of you.
And I think that's the biggest thing whenever you're looking at your networking partners is when you're approaching them, what is a benefit to them? Why would they want to work with you? So things like pharmacists, for example, there's probably some medications or the carriers that they enjoy working with and some that they don't. So having those conversations, making sure that, you're staying in network if you are recommending a carrier. That's just an example of one, but just when you're thinking about going to network with someone, what's in it for them? Why should they talk to you? But in addition to that, be thinking through the time of year it is and what type of partner you're working with. So you wouldn't want to attack. You would not want to do not
attack. It can feel that way if you do it wrong. It really can.
Do not go to a tax consultant during tax season. You'd want to make sure that the timing's right. If you're networking with a property and casualty person, don't wait until there's been a big natural disaster and they're filing 1 million claims. So just be conscious of, when you're going, who you're talking to, and what's in it for them.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing is look for some of those kind of niche and unique networking partners, not just other professionals that work with a similar client base to yours, but look for just people in the community as well. Whether that's your church, your civic organizations, your Elks Lodge, your Optimist, whatever it may be. Look for those type of folks, and then even look at some of maybe the kind of niche providers, your audiologists, your optometrists, even your dentists, folks that maybe don't get as much attention as the pharmacist that everyone has to go to on a monthly basis. Right. A lot of times those folks may have a lot of issues. They may be in network with a plan, but maybe no one knows how to find them through a physician finder tool or something like that. So those can be really fruitful relationships and really good ways to build that value for everyone involved. It helps clients access care, access their services they're entitled to or eligible for, and then it also, of course, helps those providers in turn.
Yeah, we were talking to an agent last week actually about dental, and he was commenting how most dental plans are not in network with the dentist in his
Sure.
area. And there are several that have a loose PPO or no network.
Yeah.
So it was more of an educational conversation with that dentist than instead of, if you're on Medicare, no, I don't want that client. It's, talking to them about if I enroll them in this particular plan, then here's how we can do the reimbursement and here's what everything would look like. So you can still service them, you can still take care of them, but I'll help with the claims. Yep. So just making sure you're educated on some of the extra things like that is giving that particular dentist additional service and additional business. Like that's what's in it for them. So making sure you understand the plans and what's available and how it connects to that particular person as well.
Absolutely. And I think the big thing with networking, and why we always talk about it so much is it comes back to that building trust. Mm-hmm. And you can build trust one client at a time, or like I said originally, you can borrow trust. Mm-hmm. You can build trust with one person who's that center of influence, strategic alliance, referral partner, whatever you want to call them. You can build trust with that one person and then borrow the trust that they have with their clients is functionally what you're doing. Right. It doesn't mean that it stops there or that you shouldn't continue to build trust with those clients once they become clients, but it's that foot in the door. It shortens that window of building trust because you're able to kind of trade on their name a little bit. I think the only other thing that we get asked about a lot with networking is referral fees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, referral fees are probably one of the most asked things about networking. And usually we say, you can do it, but that just adds an extra element of complication and conversation that you would have with that person. The end goal that you want to have is the trust is exactly what you've been mentioning, Jalen, is building that trust so that that person knows that where the line is. What are you offering? When are you offering it? And what is that client expecting from you? Mm-hmm. And vice versa. When are you referring things? So it's essentially servicing that client more holistically by having each other. And then you're not crossing any lines. You're not, you're not stepping on the toes of that other person. So it's helping that person more holistically. And hopefully the end goal is that person is a better loyal client because you've helped them find other professionals that can help enhance whatever the services are that you're networking with. So you can do it. There is some compliance rules about that as well, about how much you can pay. But in terms of do we recommend it? Usually not.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the standards haven't changed a lot in the past few years. Still that $100 for an MA plan, $25 for a PDP are the limits on those referral fees. But again, it's, I would encourage folks that it's never a bad idea to send a gift card or a fruit basket or whatever you think is an appropriate gift to a referral partner, as long as it's within those limits. But I would never encourage anyone to build a partnership where that's the only value they see. Mm-hmm. It needs to be a larger value for them than just that check every so often. It needs to be a value in what you're doing for each other, not just that referral fee.
Yeah, and the other thing with networking is looking at it as there's always time and money. Those are the two things that you're going to be investing with anything marketing. With networking, it's mostly time. It's going to be something that when you're looking at a networking partner, that you're looking the long game. You're looking to slow down and realize that this is going to be over a long period of time, continuous client base coming to you. It's going to take a lot of trust and a lot of conversations and a lot of where's the line. So it's one of those things you can't just come into it, like you said, with your waders on and your bucket and your fishing pole in hand. You can't just show up at the pond and ready to fish. You've got to have conversations, and it's a partnership. So I think that's the biggest thing when we talk to our agents a lot is, it's not a quick turnaround type of thing, but it is going to fill your bucket full of lots of fish.
Well, and you brought up a really good point, I think, that it's always, no matter what you're doing, whether it's networking, marketing, whatever the case may be, time and money. And I think the biggest thing that people have trouble with sometimes is understanding which one's more valuable. Sometimes money is cheaper than time. Sometimes it actually makes more financial sense to not spend your time doing a certain activity. It makes sense to spend money on advertising, whether that's, mass marketing, radio, billboards, whether that's mailers for retention or things like that. Just understand sometimes that money is cheaper than time for some people, and knowing how to prioritize those two things. So looking at a some folks will say figure out what your hourly wage is and then decide what's not worth that time. I think that's a great way to maybe start thinking about it, but you also kind of have to think about what's the future value of an activity. Some people will say, community engagement is obviously a super valuable thing that we see with a lot of really successful agents.
Yeah. The other thing I think you brought up a really good point of the time versus money is, are you tracking it? That's something that a lot of people will track financially, how much they spent, but not how much time they spent someplace. So tracking both those things, I think, would be incredibly important to see where is your time spent, where is your money spent, and what is worth the acquisition cost.
Well, and I think that, and we all know somebody like this, especially if you're in, a small to mid-sized community and you do a lot of networking. I think we all know that person that it seems like all they do is network. They're at every event. You see them in all the Chamber of Commerce pictures. They're in 9 different clubs and organizations. It doesn't really seem like they ever do business. They just network. So I think tracking that time is a really vital way to not fall into that trap.
So another thing that we see a lot of agents asking about is events. And this goes into several different things of, should I do it regularly? Is it just something we should do, before our busy season during AEP? Do I get carrier reps involved? There's so many different layers of events and how to make sure that they're doing it compliantly and also making sure it's worth their time. So I think that's been another really big question we've been getting asked recently, partly because of the final rule, a little bit of that has changed how to handle events, but also I think overall our client base has just changed how they buy. And who they trust. So it goes back to that also. But events are a big topic right now.
Absolutely. And I think educational events especially. I'm getting so many questions with the final rule, like you mentioned, changing a few things about educational events, of whether they are worth the time anymore, whether it's something that still makes sense for agents to do. And I think it absolutely is still worth it. And I think you brought up a really good point of how people like to buy. That statistic has been thrown around for years and years that by the time someone talks to you as an agent, or doesn't matter what it is, car salesman, someone who sells cakes and pies, it doesn't matter, by the time a client comes to you, they are already 60 or 70% of the way through the buying process. Now, back in the day, that might have been looking people up in the phone book or asking friends for referrals, and that's still part of it in some cases, but nowadays a lot of that research happens online.
For sure.
And with information being so readily available, I think there's this misconception, and I'm not for 1 second saying that base level education is not vitally important for people to understand their Medicare options, but I do think a lot of people underestimate how much Medicare 101 knowledge a lot of beneficiaries do have by the time they get to you. And again, not saying you shouldn't rehash that, but what I am saying is, if you're going to spend the time and the money and the resources to do an educational event, pick a topic that matters.
Right.
In rare cases, I would say, sure, a basic Medicare 101 probably makes sense, especially if you can kind of control the audience, or that you're going into a like a T65 rich environment. We've got a lot of folks that partner to do educational workshops for like large employers for their retirees. That might make sense to do a Medicare 101. If you're just doing general community educational events, pick topics that are going to matter. Pick topics like how Medicare and diabetes work together, some of the new insulin provisions, all of the pumps and durable medical equipment, or talk about Medicare and skilled nursing, which we just talked about last episode. So things that can be really educational, really high value, and a little more specific.
And I think sometimes we talked about how clients, definitely the way they buy has changed, and trust is so important. So if they get to sit and listen to you talk and decide, do I trust this person or not?
Sure.
That sometimes is a first step in a really good relationship and buying process of just them making sure that they understand what you can offer them, what you can provide, and also what your communication style is like, what your knowledge base is. People really want to be, we're in the show me state, Shaylin and I are.
Sure.
We want to be shown. Show me that you can do this first. So I think that's a nice way at any event where you can advertise. So we always recommend, if you can do something regularly, it's an easy way when you're out warm chattering, is what I usually call when you're like out in a grocery line, or maybe you're at soccer practice with a kid, or at church or whatever, it's a nice warm chatter option to offer to that client also of hop on this event. And using technology on top of that for events has been something recently, post-COVID world, people are way more comfortable. So maybe you do an event in person, maybe it's like you said, a radio type thing where you're on a radio every day. Maybe it's a call-in conference line where they can call in and listen to you. But being involved in your community and creating that resource of information on topics that actually matter, like the diabetes, home health care, skilled nursing. There are so many good CMS pieces out there that you could literally take any of them and make it a great topic. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel with pieces either when you're handing them out. There's a really good chart on 2 different pieces on CMS. One's on Medicare Advantage and one is on supplements, but there's a beautiful chart you could hand out. There's so many things that you could use that are already available.
Absolutely. And I think that comes back to don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of unique ways to drive interest and reach new clients and communicate with existing clients. But that does not mean that you need to go out and build anything from scratch. There's plenty of great resources through the carriers, through your uplines, through various resources that they've done it. They've seen it. I promise someone has been through this process before, and they've probably got some really good ideas to share with you. So definitely recommend checking that out, especially when it comes to things like client retention. Client retention, of course, we're talking a little bit about new clients and how to, remain relevant and in touch with people, but that retention piece, especially now, if you look at some of the data out there from, some of like the big call centers that publish data or have it in their earnings calls, retention is definitely kind of on a downtrend as an industry. And
trust has definitely changed too. Like, people stick with the same dentist or the same doctor all the time just because they're in their local community. No, you're seeing a lot of people switching around. There's just so much information, so much technology. What is your value add? And are you continuing to touch base with those clients? It's definitely, I feel like post-COVID and pre-COVID, I feel like a lot of things have changed in terms of buying and what people, whether it's simplifying, maybe that financial division down the road, maybe they added a Medicare division, that person's consolidating because they want simplicity in their life. So it is important to kind of think about what value add you're giving and making sure that your clients are know who you are and they're going to stick around.
Absolutely. So I think one of the big things, like in all of this that we're talking about, is compliance, again, on everyone's mind. We definitely want to make sure that we're doing things compliantly, and really it all comes from this problem. And I use kind of an environmental science analogy regarding pollution. So we've talked about a lot of great community ways to build leads and generate leads. Doesn't mean you can't buy leads. There's still good lead vendors out there, but unfortunately a lot of bad ones as well. So like the big thing that I tell people over and over and over, know where your leads come from. If you're buying from an aggregator or a reseller, know where they're getting those leads from. But what CMS in the end is trying to do is, just like we do with pollution, you want to find the source. And you've got point source pollution where you can trace it back upriver and it was a chemical spill at this factory or something like that. Right now, especially in the Medicare world, we've got a lot of non-point source pollution. It's coming from so many places that we can't really pin down exactly who the bad actors are. So one of the big things is just knowing where those leads are coming from. A lot of these changes and how marketing materials get approved are really designed to make sure that carriers are more accountable for the pieces that are marketing their plans, so CMS can go back and take action against those bad actors. But like we've spent the past several minutes talking about, those self-generated or referral leads are going to be probably the most secure. They're going to be the most high value because, again, like we said, it's all about that trust and value. If it's something you generated yourself or from a trusted referral partner, you're at step 5 in the value chain instead of step 0 with a purchased lead. So I think that helps a lot.
Borrowing the trust is 100% accurate of just making sure. And again, I think a lot of things we're talking about, besides leads where you're just getting instant people asking for help, the return we're getting recently and the amount of people, like you might get a lower return and then actually being able to sell that return has just dropped dramatically in the last 10 years since I've been in the industry. So again, I think that goes back to how are people buying. And one of the fun things that I always recommend doing is sitting down and for a day, just think about who you've bought from and why.
Sure.
Why are you buying from a shoe company? Why did you go into a store? Or did you not go to a store? Did you go online? So a lot of things have changed to be easy, simple, and a lot of it is trust. Like, did my friend refer that? Is a family member talking about it? So making you someone that is on the fridge. Maybe that's a recipe. Maybe that's the medication tracker.
Yeah.
Maybe it's weekly or monthly touch points. Just making sure you're in front of that person so they can do their own little warm chatters with their friends and family and get people over to you. It's not an instant gratification like I think it used to be, where you could go out and purchase a big chunk of leads and get it. So I think we're talking a lot of almost drip marketing type ideas today, but honestly and truly, when we're looking at our top producers, that's what they're doing. Absolutely. They're a pinnacle in their community in so many different directions.
Well, and I think you bring up a really good point that kind of leads into our next topic. Is a lot of agents got used to that kind of instant gratification of buying a lead and just being able to sell them. And now, of course, CMS has thrown a little bit of a wrench in that by bringing back the 48-hour scope of appointment rule. And like I said, I don't want to rehash the final rule. We've got a bunch of resources out on that all over the industry. But I want to talk about how agents can take that 48-hour rule that may seem like a hurdle. And again, there's exceptions to it. But that 48-hour rule, in my mind, is a big opportunity for a lot of agents that maybe they didn't have in the past, or at least didn't think they had, even though it's things they could have been doing all along.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I've talked to a lot of agents, and I think most sells or purchase agreements with a client is very front heavy, where a lot of the work goes in the front. They sell, and then they're basically done with that client. This allows you to start with the client, have a conversation, collect information, collect data. Maybe it's the drug tracking, all the lists. Maybe it's gathering all the information about them so that you can kind of make an informed presentation in terms of what is important to them. But it forces you to have that 48 hours to have multiple conversations with that individual and make sure that they are for sure sold on you. So that turns the front heavy conversation into more of a middle conversation and allows you also, you've started that relationship maybe after you back end load it, where you follow up with them 2 weeks later and make sure that they've got their cards and that they've booked their doctor appointment. But it's definitely shifting, where the communication is.
Well, and I think, you brought up a good point that this 48-hour, waiting period, the scope appointment window, is such an opportunity in a sense of building that trust, building that value, and as you already mentioned, collecting information. There's so many things that we need from a client that, how many times have you had someone show up at your office and they've got that gallon Ziploc bag of medications and they dump them out on the table, you read through them, sign them up for a plan, and then 2 days later they call back and say, hey, I left my warfarin on the kitchen counter, or, some other really impactful drug. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits, is it gives the client and you time to do a little more thorough examination of needs. And I think that's one thing where, again, a lot of folks are really concerned about it, but CMS coming out with, as they mentioned in the final rule, a list of elements required prior to enrollment, which they've said will come out later this year in sub-regulatory guidance, and is going to be kind of a list of topics that brokers are required to cover with a client before they can proceed with an enrollment. And, reading through that, it's a lot of mumbo jumbo, a lot of jargonism, but at the end of the day, CMS is building a required fact finder that you have to use with your clients. Now, we don't know exactly what's in it, but some of the things they initially proposed were things that you're probably already doing with your clients, things like going over drugs, going over networks, going over doctors, addressing any of their major health needs and concerns. So I think that I like it, honestly.
It gives you the ability to be extra compliant then, because it's telling you exactly what you need to go over.
Absolutely. I'm healthily skeptical of it until we see exactly what it looks like. But I do think it definitely is going to give you something to fill that 48 hours. That's the big thing, is, CMS wants to give consumers as many opportunities as possible to opt out of a sale. That's why we've got this waiting period. Someone can sign a scope, but they still have to pick the phone up again or go into the office or whatever the case may be 48 hours later. So it gives them a chance to think over that and make sure that you are worth their business. And I think that's where the opportunity side comes in. How are you showing in that 48 hours that it's worth doing business
What's
with
your value
you
proposition?
specific? Absolutely. I mean, I look at it this way. If you had 48 hours to convince someone to give you a kidney, like you'd pull out all the stops.
So hopefully today, during our podcast, we walked through a really good background of how to market Medicare.
Yeah.
And make sure that we went over, some of the ways that go into ways of giving you a steady stream of clients.
Yeah, I really think this whole idea, we threw out kind of a lot of ideas that may seem a little disjointed, but what I really want to leave people with is to take these ideas, these concepts, and create a system, a plan, something that is repeatable. And like we said, that time versus money. A lot of these things are going to take a lot of work, time, and money up front. But if you're building kind of a robust system of marketing, it's going to kind of have a diminishing cost over time where the longer you do it, the more affordable it will get.
Right. And we always recommend multiple prongs of marketing too. So taking a look at what does your current system look like and tracking everything from, who are you networking with? What kind of events are you doing? What kind of mailers are you putting together? What are you doing to retain your clients? Going over all of that. And then especially like we talked about in the very beginning, how can you shift some of the marketing stuff over to communication so that you're not stuck on that time frame of getting things approved and making sure that, it's actually compliant year after year. So what does your marketing system look like and how can you build a long-lasting lead source, I think is our end goal between the two of us talking through all of these, like you said, kind of disjointed things,
Absolutely.
But it's all just about creating a long-lasting lead source.
Yep, absolutely. I think end of the day, the big takeaway here is slow down, come up with a system, make sure you're providing value, building trust, and at the end of the day, that's going to generate probably more leads than some of these kind of quick, lead buying and things like that. So with that, absolutely join us on the next one. But this was a great episode to put together. I think we got a lot of ideas in front of people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for watching the next episode of Medicare Industry Insider, and we'll talk to you in the next one.